Raising the stakes over Iran's nuclear program, France's foreign minister calls for Europe to close ranks. Will his tough stance help to solve the crisis, or will it backfire? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Jane Dutton. France's foreign minister has been meeting his Russian counterpart for talks on Iran's nuclear program after suggesting the world should be prepared to go to war. Bernard Kouchner followed the remarks by advocating further diplomacy, but his words have raised tensions and sent shockwaves around the world. Mr. Kouchner says Europe should pursue its own economic sanctions against Iran if the UN fails to agree to tougher measures. The UN Security Council, in which Russia holds a veto, is due to meet this week to discuss a third round of sanctions. Now, so far, both Russia and China have opposed the plan. Iran, which says it only wants nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, has scorned Mr. Kouchner's words and accused France of aping US policies. Well, indeed, after the meeting with Russia's Sergei Lavrov, Mr. Kouchner appeared to make a dramatic climb down. He said war with Iran was the worst that could happen and called for negotiations without cease. It came after the head of the UN's nuclear watchdog, the International Atomic Energy Agency, warned force should only be used against Iran as a last resort. Mohammed al-Baradei urged Iran's critics to learn the lessons of Iraq, saying there are rules on how to use force, and I would hope that everybody would have gotten the lesson after the Iraq situation, where 700,000 innocent civilians have lost their lives on the suspicion that the country has nuclear weapons. So what to make of all of this? Joining us now are our guests in Paris, François Géret, Professor of Strategic Studies at the Sorbonne in Paris and Chairman of the French Institute of Strategic Analysis. From Washington, Claire Lopez, Vice President of the Intelligence Summit and former Executive Director of the Iran Policy Committee. And from Tehran, Saeed Leilaz, an Iranian political analyst. Welcome to the program. Professor Géret, what can we read into this war rhetoric and this saber rattling coming from France? Not something you'd normally associate with a country.
Well, the problem is that Mr. Kouchner has used the word war, which is to some extent a magic word. And it has created a lot of tension. And basically, he has just said that it was necessary to avoid a situation which could lead to war. In that sense, is perfectly consistent with what President Sarkozy 2 weeks earlier pointed out, saying that, and that's probably the main issue, it is impossible to tolerate Iran producing any kind of nuclear weapons, and that by all means it has to be avoided. It has to be solved by negotiation, by diplomacy, because if diplomacy and if all the other means were to fail, well, we should face a situation of military action. And Kouchner basically didn't say a lot more about that, but he used again that extraordinary word, which is war, and it has sent probably a strong signal to the Iranian government. It's up now to the Iranian government to understand that France and that European countries are very serious about the end up of that situation.
Mr. Leilaz, do you think the Iranian government sees it that way, and what do you think their response will be going forward?
It seems that the situation is going to be worsened because in our opinion in Tehran, France has a very key role in the Middle East, and it has made, this country has made some kind of balance about U.S. policy in the region, because U.S. policy is very radical and conservative these years, and France's position has been moderate, more moderate, and they made a balance in the region. When the French authorities say such a radical statement, it seems that the situation in the region is going to be worsened, and clearly everybody is worried in the country because of this statement from Mr. Kushner.
Mrs. Lopez, don't you think, though, that this indicates how concerned France is about a nuclear Iran?
Yes, indeed. I think that the statements by Mr. Kushner definitely signal a significant change in the perspective of the French government, and since, of course, President Sarkozy took office, a new willingness, if you will, to recognize the dangers of a nuclear Iran, an Iran which continues to support terrorism, continues to manufacture and ship weapons to Iraq that are used to kill American and Iraqi and other coalition troops. And a willingness to mention, even to use the word war, that would be the final and ultimate last option. Clearly, he has reiterated the willingness of France to pursue every diplomatic means, and including a statement by President Sarkozy recently that he urges French companies such as the oil firm Total to hold back or to divest even from investments inside of Iran, to use measures like that, economic measures, diplomatic measures, if there is any chance for those to succeed. And of course, the 5 members of the Security Council are meeting in Washington, D.C. this week, and we will see if they come to a decision on new and more stringent sanctions against Iran. But obviously, the statements by Mr. Kushner indicate that France understands negotiations have not produced much in the last 3 years, and that we must all be willing now to face the ultimate responsibility that a most dangerous terrorist nation such as Iran cannot be permitted to acquire a nuclear weapons capability.
We've heard Professor Jazeera Mohammed Al-Baradei from the IAEA saying that we must give Iran more time, that we're going to show some sort of transparency going forward. Do you think these words now from the French are undermining the IAEA?
I do think that the whole endeavor by the EIA is absolutely necessary. It is very technical. It is very hard for the public opinion to understand exactly what it is all about. The agency is dealing with very technical documents. The agency is asking questions and more questions, and the agency is doing a great work in clarifying the nuclear situation of Iran. It is extremely important. It has been extremely important in the case of Iraq, and it will be extremely important in the case of Iran.
Okay, why then is he calling for tougher EU sanctions?
Why, excuse me, interrupting, why legitimacy.
Why is he calling for the EU to take a tougher stance now?
Well, the issue is that we have been in a stalemate for about 2 years. Since the beginning of the year 2007, we have heard absolutely nothing from the Iranian government. On the contrary, we have heard some kind of provocations by President Ahmadinejad, and I regret very much all that rhetoric about Israel, about the negationism of the Holocaust. It was absolutely unproductive. As a result, all those people in Iran, including inside the Iranian leadership, who were ready to engage into serious dialogue, have been unable to continue and to produce new results.
Okay,
so
if I could bring in, excuse me interrupting, Mr. Leyles here.
We are running out of time.
Okay, let me just bring in Mr. Leyles here. I mean, this tough talk, this talk of war, this talk of sanctions, isn't it going to frighten Iran off and away from the negotiating table?
In my opinion, Mr. Kushner's statement doesn't rely on technical issues, because technical issues show that the cooperation of Tehran has been better recently with the IAEA. Mr. Kushner's statement is because of France is turning its diplomacy to a conservatives' side. What we need at the moment is not threaten the Tehran or each other, because a threat of Tehran, even military action, doesn't work in this special case. We need to continue our dialogue, especially a strategic dialogue, and we need to understand the real situation in Tehran. On the ground, the main problem of Tehran is that there is no security guarantee from United States for Tehran. And especially after collapsing the Saddam Hussein regime, Islamic Republic of Iran has realized that if United States wants to destroy any regime, wants to occupy any country, nobody can stop them, neither France nor Russia and China and nobody else.
Okay, let me ask Mrs. Lopez for a brief statement about that. Do you think war now with Iran is more likely or less likely?
I would like to think that it is not more likely. However, I think we need to recognize very clearly that negotiations get us nowhere with this regime. We have to face the fact that there is a coalition or axis of evil, even if you wish to call it that, among regimes in the world that include Damascus, Syria, Tehran in Iran, as well as Pyongyang in North Korea. And these regimes are coordinating together to frustrate the objectives of the liberal democratic world, to bring stability and democracy to places such as Iraq. Our objectives do not coincide at all in the Middle East. And the fact that Iran has been intransigent for years on the subject of its nuclear weapons program, all the while coordinating with North Korea to develop it, and perhaps also with Syria to develop theirs and its own as well, should be an indicator to us that negotiations are not getting us anywhere. We need to consider other methods if Iran will not respond to the Security Council demands that it, first of all, halt all nuclear enrichment. That demand remains on the table. Sanctions and negotiations have not done much to date to get Tehran to meet that demand of the United Nations Security Council. We would like to believe that negotiations such as are going on in Washington, D.C. this week might have an effect. I think we have to be ready, as Foreign Minister Kushner has said, that those negotiations will not be successful.
Okay, on that note, we're going to take a short break, but when we come back, how is French foreign policy changing and what effects will it have? Stay with us.